Hey everyone, and welcome to Kandy's Quarantine Conversations with me, Kandy Delore. Joining me today is Rodney Mueller. He's an executive coach and he's a business advisor from the United States. Hi, Rodney.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with you. Of course, obviously, lots going on in America. I think hopefully for the best and to create some great change in America. So
Most definitely. It's great to have you here. Actually, I'm very excited to have you on Kandy's Quarantine Conversations today because you are such a positive influence. And we first met a few years ago via your Absent Father podcast, and we even did a show together, which was absolutely brilliant. And you have such a powerful story behind you. And you haven't let anything that's happened to you affect your future. So I thought it'd be really important to speak with someone like you during this time. And I'm aware that you do so many other things apart from the Absent Father Project and podcast. And I also wanted to talk to you about those things today as well, if you don't mind.
absolutely, I'd love to.
Oh, thank you. Well, I know that you are first and foremost an executive business coach, and I definitely want to speak about that in a moment. But I was telling you a bit earlier that I was checking out your website the other day, and I noticed that you're no stranger to leadership because you used to be a drill sergeant, and I didn't know that about you until I
Hmm.
looked on your website. So, what was that line of work like?
It's funny. Recently, in my business, I've been undergoing a bit of a brand reinvention, and people will see that here in the next few months, kind of the fruits of that. But we've been talking a lot about that experience of being a drill sergeant, and I always say it was my absolute favorite. It's the favorite job that I've ever had, and I'm really lucky because I've gotten to train coaches and do deeply meaningful and transformational work with people. And but being a drill sergeant was my favorite job ever. And I'll never forget the time when I realized that I was a drill sergeant and a life coach at the same time. And for most people, they would think that that's such a unusual juxtaposition to be a drill sergeant and a life coach. But when I thought about it, it's actually very similar. And for me, as a drill sergeant, it was so meaningful to me because I was very clear about the purpose and responsibility I had to those young men in this case. Because not only was I preparing them for this career that they had taken on, but I was also, possibly preparing them for being in harm's way, and how to survive and how to take care of each other. And I loved it. Like I really think about basic training as being um, uh, a 10-week transformational experience. Yeah.
That's amazing because I guess that there are so many skills along the lines of discipline that you can take from that profession of being a sergeant and merge it into coaching as well. So I can definitely see how that can happen.
Yeah.
So you also run the Absent Father Project and podcast, which is a really good support system for men who have grown up without fathers in their lives and suffered from like side effects such as having issues with success as they get older and their relationships and things like self-confidence. So would you be able to tell us a bit about the Absent Father Project and the podcast, please?
Yeah. So the Epsom Father Project, the origin started. I had been in my own journey. I grew up with an absent father. He was gone before I was born. Ended up meeting him a few times later in life, and I thought I was mostly over it, which I think is somewhat common experience for people who grow up with an absent or distant father. That by 20 we're over it. And then when I was about 28, it's about I guess 10 years ago. When I should have been working on my coaching business, I was on Facebook and saw a post from Oprah, who had been a personal hero and guide for me from a young age. I watched her since I was 5, and she introduced me to a lot of teachers, and her teaching actually really helped me learn how to become a man, learn about relationship, learn about personal development, spirituality. So anyway, I responded to this ad basically, did you grow up with an absent father? What's your story? And to make a long story short, I ended up being on a show called Fatherless Sons, which was part of Oprah's Life Class. And through that experience, I realized that there was more healing work for me to do, and that I was impacted more than I thought in growing up with an absent father. The thing that hit home the most was while we were on the show, Ayanna Van Zandt, who is a famous life coach who often appears on Oprah and has her own show, she asked my wife, are you afraid that he will abandon you the way that he was abandoned by his father? And that question really struck me. And so I finished the show. It aired. That was an opening of major vulnerability because there's millions of people seeing my story. But at the same time, I really started to think, because I had been a coach at this time, had been a drill sergeant and, really worked with a lot of people. And I started to uncover some of these impacts of growing up with an absent father, like rigid self-sufficiency and major control around money and fear around money and money equaling safety. And I also started to notice the superpowers like deep empathy and ability to lead, a sense of creating trust amongst other people. And so what happened is I just started writing, and I bought absentfatherproject.com, and I wrote 2 blogs, and I wasn't going to publish them. But when I finished the 2 blogs, I thought this might help one person. And so I published it. And that kind of started the Absent Father Project. I've been writing on that for several years. And then that gave birth to the Absent Father podcast that you mentioned. And it's now in its 2nd season. The first season was mostly me telling my story and a lot of the insights that I've learned over the first year. And now we've had several guests on the show that have different stories, different absent father stories. So I think, unfortunately, the experience of having an absent or distant father is somewhat universal, because so many men traditionally are emotionally distant or not present.
Yes.
And there's various forms. So, it's very interesting in this season 2, we've had, one young woman who, her father could be one of 2 men. She doesn't know who it is. She hopes it's one over the other because he would want to be involved in her life. To someone who lost their father at a young age, to someone who their father and mother were in a normal relationship, quote unquote, for the first 10 years of her life, and then suddenly got divorced and then really flew out of her life, to one other person who, by his own account, is the product of a biracial lesbian couple conceived through artificial insemination. And so there was no father present, but a lot of the same impacts and superpowers. So that's the Absent Father podcast, and we're now inviting on some additional experts that'll be launched later in the fall, to really talk about how do you overcome and heal from the impacts of growing up with an absent father.
Yes, that would be so good, because it's really important that we have experts to, also give advice as well. And I know that you are you're someone who is very in touch with the issues that come with growing up without a father. You're also really good when it comes to helping people when they're seeking forgiveness, or even just, controlling their anger and stuff like that, because your story is absolutely amazing. I mean, you are really a great person. And I think that your podcast is very needed, and not just for men either, but for women like myself too, because when I first heard your podcast, it's one of the things that made me reach out to you. You know, I thought I have to know who this person is. You know, I think I read an article about you at first. Yes, so I think that that is really important, that we have men like yourself who are open and honest and willing to speak about these issues and all the side effects that come from it into adulthood as well. Because most people just think that as children, you know, you grow up with a father, you've accepted it. But as you approach your teen years, even, you know, you can get yourself in certain situations that you wouldn't actually believe are related to the fact that you've grown up fatherless, or because you don't have a male positive influence in your life. And even as you get into your adult years and you have relationship issues, or you choose somebody who is not a good match for you, but it's because, you know, you did not have a father figure in your life to teach you about love and, you know, relationships the way your mother would have. Men tend to listen to other men who have been through this sort of experience rather than women, because they often think that we're just emotional or we're having a moan, you know. So it's really good that you are doing this. And also what's even better is the fact that you've managed to, you know, put your life together in such a way that others can see from the outside, well, you know what, it is possible to go through all of these things and still make a good future for yourself. You're a family man. You know, you've got your wife, you've got your daughter. I see so many lovely pictures of you all on social media, and you genuinely look happy as well. And, you know, it melts me, because I've listened to your story when we did the Absent Father podcast and Kandy Care's podcast together, and your story is most definitely a touching one and a moving one. And for anybody who wants to hear it in full, please do listen to the podcast. It's on YouTube. And just to see that you're not even finished with certain things that you're doing in your life yet. Like, I'm noticing that you've started an amazing hemp farm, which I also want to speak to you about as well. But you definitely just keep going, you keep pushing, and it's amazing that you help others to do the same too. So it's great when you can look at a coach, you know, someone who is a life coach and a business advisor, and be able to say, well, yeah, this person really can help you, because looking at his life, he has achieved the things that, you know, you might want to achieve. Or even if it's something, even if you've got a different thing in mind, you know, you are the go-to person because you make things happen. So that is absolutely brilliant. I must say, I really respect you a lot. But going back to Oprah just quickly, what was it like being interviewed by the queen of all talk shows?
Well, it was surreal, you know, and I share that often. I really would say that Oprah has been one of the biggest influences in my entire life. You know, my babysitter would have Channel 5, NBC, you know, in the US, on all day long, and so I was watching it, you know, at my babysitter's from a really young age, and so it was really surreal for me. I've had a couple. You know, I had another interaction with Oprah when I was in college. I was a senior in college, and my girlfriend at the time surprised me with tickets to the show. And we ended up being, you know, we were trying to get there really early so we get a close seat. And we ended up being late, like, you know, number 300 or something. And we ended up sitting in the front row. They asked us, pulled us out of the crowd and put us in the front row. The crazy part about that, that's a longer story, but the crazy part about that is that the show was a surprise, and the guest, so the show ended up being John Travolta, and he was on the show for a movie premiere for a movie called Basic. And two crazy things about that. Number one is John Travolta was the only image I ever had of my father. My mom, I never knew what he looked like. I'd never seen a picture. So when I would say, what did he look like? She always told me that he looked like John Travolta. And so that was too weird. And The second thing that was really crazy about that movie, Basic. So again, I was a senior in college at the time. I had been in the Army for 4 years. My girlfriend in college took me to the show, who also had never met her father, whose name happened to be Rodney, who I encouraged her to meet, and she later did meet her biological father. All kinds of stories in there. But the movie Basic, my last name is Miller, Mueller. Some people pronounce it Mueller. In the
Okay,
movie
I'm one of those
Basic,
people.
which is with John Travolta, which is like the only image I ever had of what my father looked like, which I think was a generous reflection from my mom. But in the movie, one of the characters also was Sergeant Mueller. And I was Sergeant Mueller at the time. So there's all these wild synchronicities with Oprah. And then fast forward 9 years later, and then I'm on the show and being interviewed by Oprah it was surreal. We flew up to the studio. I got to be in the studio and, see the whole thing. But it was really a catalyst. I felt there's an unseen connection there. So hopefully next time I'll get to be there on Super Soul Sunday. I think that's kind of the ultimate dream, to sit under the oaks or be in Maui at the ranch and
Yeah.
connect with her. She's a deeply important teacher and spiritual figure, I think, of our time. We will miss her very much when she's not here.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Wow, that sounds amazing though. You make me laugh when you say you were being generous. Your mother was being generous by referring to your father as looking like John Travolta.
Yeah, I think so.
I bet you watched a lot of John Travolta movies probably growing up, did you? Or
Not on purpose, but yes. I mean, he was around, so.
because you know what, funny enough, my mom used to say that my dad looks like because there was a time when I didn't know my dad. Actually, so much has happened since I last spoke to you. One of those things is that I did meet up with my real dad.
Wow.
Yes. And when he wasn't in my life, my mom used to refer to him as, I can't remember the actor's name, but if you remember the Parkers, that sitcom, and it was about a woman who was, she loved this guy and she kept chasing him all around the place. Nikki Parker, her name was. And the guy, I can't remember his name, was the actor. I can't remember his name, his character name either. For some reason, my mind's gone to a blank about him now. But my mom used to say that he looks like my dad, and I used to watch him a lot. And I would have probably not said this as a child, but as an adult, when I'm more open now, I can say, yeah, I used to watch that guy a lot, and it's simply because my mom said that he looks like my dad, and I felt like that was a connection somehow.
Yeah.
Sounds weird, but
no, it's such a sweetness, something that I notice, as I'm talking to people who particularly that experience where your father was physically absent. We, whether that's due to leaving or to, they passed away maybe when you were younger, that there's such a sweetness, the children of those absent fathers, that we just hold on to these pieces, like this few pieces, the way that they smelled, or a story that you heard about them.
yes.
And I just think that's really sweet to me, the way that people hold on to that. So
No, it's true, most definitely. And I can relate to what you just said as well, because I was raised by my brother's dad, who technically I have two dads, because I see him as my dad as well, and I love him very much. He's no longer with us, but I can remember his smell. I can remember his voice. I can remember how he treated me and how much he loved me. So I definitely get that. And I also hold on to things from my biological father as well. So it's like what once I felt was like a curse, as an adult, it's now a blessing for me, So I can definitely understand what you mean there.
And I think that's the thing that I love most about what I've gotten from the work I've done in relationship to having an absent father, and what I hope that people get from the Absent Father podcast, because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of impacts. We talked about a few of them, like, you know, overworking or having difficulty getting supported, or, you know, being hyper vigilant about money and money equaling safety. Um, um, and I think when you don't realize that some of those impacts are not just because of, they're not just from you, that it's a result, a natural impact of growing up in the experience that you grew up, you can then start to cultivate some compassion for yourself and some forgiveness. And when you can do that, you can also integrate these great superpowers that you've gotten from this experience. I know for sure, 100%, that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today without my experience of growing up with an absent father. I know that I wouldn't have been the leader and drill sergeant that I was. And I definitely would not be the father that I am now and am going to be for my daughter, which I think is pretty cool. And I think pretty common amongst people who grew up with an absent father. That I certainly see this with my three sisters who I met later in life that also had the same absent father, and they're just extraordinary mothers. So I think that there is a gift in that, you know, when you can move through that experience. So.
Yeah. I remember you saying that to me actually, something similar, during the last podcast that we did together. And I actually held on to that and took that with me. And there were times when, I felt like, oh, what am I doing? I didn't know what I was doing with my life, or I just felt like, sometimes I had some low moments. And I would actually remember you saying, people who have been in these positions before, they actually end up doing quite well for themselves. They don't quit because it's like, they almost nearly have something to prove, and you're so right. You are right. But can you tell us a bit about your coaching services, please, and the different types of clients that you support?
Yeah. So, I've been a coach for 12 years now. It's pretty wild.
Oh,
And it's evolved over the years. Today I mostly support people who are leading growing businesses, so kind of startup founders and executives and things like that. But the commonality over the last several years is really people that are quite similar to me. So they tend to be people who are extraordinarily hard workers, really driven to be successful, which I think is kind of oftentimes from this place of, we have a sense of, I call them overachievers, which I never would have called myself. But the commonality is like, it's like whatever we do is never enough. And I tend to work with those folks, and it's really fun to do it with people in growing businesses, because the challenge that they face is that they have to get supported and scale themselves, because to grow the business, they can't do it by themselves. And
yeah,
so that tends to be who I work with. But um, I've worked with people across the spectrum, and when I say, now it's executive coach, you could say life coach, you could say business coach, whatever you want to call it. What I really help people do is to create and design perfectly the aim of their life. And in order to do that, there's a lot of different factors, but part of it is, a special way of tapping into, whether it's the business, like, why does the business actually exist? What is the purpose for the business? And how do we set the direction aligned with that? And in order to do that well, you also have to look, if you want a long-term sustainable success, which to me includes not just profits, but also impact and happiness and purpose. And for most people, they want to have a successful family life alongside business results. And so, we don't just look at the business. We're looking at, like, what do you yearn to create, not just in the business, but in your experience of yourself and your work, and as a leader, and as a spouse, or in a romantic relationship. And at the heart of that is, how do you relate to yourself? What is your relationship to yourself? Which is a crazy question that we don't really examine, but it is the heart and foundation for us, whether we want to believe that or not. Because if we don't relate to ourselves as who we really are and our greatness, and everyone has essential greatness, then where we create our future from is limited by that. And I am the, I always say as a coach, it's the gift and the curse. I have a love-hate relationship with coaching. I love coaching because it has it has made it mandatory for me to heal, to learn to love myself, to be there for myself, to take care of myself. And I hate coaching because I've always been limited by my ability to do that for myself. So every time I've hit a plateau in my work, it's because I've had to really reinvent my own value to myself. And the Absent Father podcast came out of that. Years of therapy and recovery work. There's a wonderful, if anybody's looking for a resource and they feel like they connect with our story, there's a wonderful resource called Adult Children of Alcoholics, which is a 12-step recovery program, which sounds very serious probably, but I want people to know anybody could benefit. And it's really, the point of that program is 12 steps to reinvent the relationship to ourselves and to spirit or a higher power, in whatever form that takes. And you don't have to have they call it Adult Children of Alcoholics, but all the alcoholism points to is there a lack of presence in your parents? And unless you had, Jesus and Mary or the Buddha or whoever you think the most perfect parent in the world of all time is, then there was probably some lack of presence. So that's been a huge gift.
Wow.
Yeah.
I loved everything that you just said. I can honestly relate to a lot of what you said, especially when you said that, you questioned the relationship that we have with ourselves, because that is so important. And a lot of us sometimes avoid the relationships that we have with ourselves because we know, we might not be practicing self-love and self-care as we should. There might be things that we're putting in front of ourselves, like our priorities might be all messed up and we're actually neglecting ourselves and we know it, and things like that. So that is really important, actually. And I don't think I've ever questioned the relationship I've had with myself in that way before. I'm very aware of self-love and self-respect and stuff like that, but to actually sit down and say, well, Kandy, what's the relationship with yourself like? I don't think I've actually presented myself with that question. So you definitely got me there with that one.
It's very important. And I think that one of the challenges that we face too is that now today, which I think is cool, like coaching is more mainstream, therapy is more mainstream, certainly this self-care thing is more mainstream, but it's really important to me to get to the depth of that question, which is not about, are you getting your nails done every week? Although that could be part of it. It's about really, how are you relating to yourself? When you make a mistake, how are you with yourself? When you need a break, how are you with yourself? Yes. I wrote this article several years ago called "Your Boss is an Asshole," which I would hope would get people's attention. And what I was really pointing to is that really maybe your actual boss is an asshole, but you, the person that is relating to yourself inside, all of us have this internal boss that's always judging what is enough or not enough, yes, criticizing, not celebrating. And that's what I'm really pointing to. And it's a humongous gift to have that awareness and to learn to reparent and to take care of ourselves the way that we would treat anyone else. Because I often will say that if you treated anyone else the way that we treat ourselves, you would be in jail.
So true. So true. Your well-being is so important. You're right. That is very, very true.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you've got a good way of explaining things, I must say. You really do. And making people think about things that they might have heard about already, but the way that you present what you're saying, it's very deep. And You must be an excellent coach, to be honest.
Hmm.
I'm sure you've got really satisfied clients that you work with. Um, but yes, my next question is about your hemp farm, because I've seen so many pictures on social media and it just looks so massive and it looks fun. I've seen your wife out on the tractor and seeing you guys planting and stuff like that. So how's that going?
Well, literally yesterday, we just finished our first round of planting. So we planted about 10,000 seedlings of
Wow.
the hemp plant, which for those that don't know, hemp is kind of a cousin of marijuana plant, but it doesn't have a psychoactive response, so you don't get high. But a lot of people are using it to relieve tension in the body, to elevate their mood, to work with anti-anxiety and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that we got into it is, my wife's family has a farm, a couple hundred acres, and it's very, very special to her family. It's been in the family for generations. I think fourth generation.
Wow.
And we moved back home to St. Louis area, which is about 5 hours south of Chicago in the U.S. We moved back home from San Francisco, which was on the coast, California, about 2,000 miles from
Wow.
St. Louis. So we moved home a couple of years ago, and the nature of our family farm is that it's in a suburb of St. Louis, which is a city of about 3 million. And the subdivisions and houses are kind of encroaching around the farm. It's like really growing up over the last 10 years. So we had been looking at, there must be some way that we can, help to generate some income for the farm to help sustain it uh, for the farm. And my wife has been on her own journey of really looking at what is my purpose. She's like, she had been a meeting planner, planning like corporate events and traveling, and it was very interesting and sexy, but not where her heart is. She was, on a spreadsheet in a computer, and she absolutely hates that. And so our first idea was we were going to buy these old vintage campers called Airstream campers. They're kind of the silver shiny campers that are really cool looking, and we were going to restore those and create like kind of a glamorous camping experience on the farm. But when we did the numbers, we realized it would be a ton of work and not very much money. So then a friend mentioned hemp, and that hemp had just become federally legal in the United States. And my wife really started investigating, and her, if you were to ask her a couple of years ago, her dream really would just be to work in the dirt, like to do yard work. Like she just loves that. And it makes a lot of sense now. I think she spent a lot of years being like, what's wrong with me? um,
Yeah.
but her grandmother and her mother and her great grandmother and her great great grandmother grew up on a farm, like waking up early, working in the dirt, living that life. And so, it's really in her blood. And um, she started researching hemp. She went to some conferences, and we started to think about how we would create it. And I think the most special thing about the hemp farm is that um, when we looked at why we were doing it, and this is something that I I'm really proud of, because in the origin of the way that we created it, it's the way that I work with business owners and people, which is like, why are you doing this? And
Yeah.
when you get a perfect alignment with the why that you're doing something, um, it's far more powerful and you're far more effective at it. So, um, why we wanted to do this was not just so we could make money, but that we could bring together the family. We could create a way for us to work together and to create success. And the way that we did it, which I think is really cool, we let kind of our closest family, invest a little amount. So if we win, they win. And 10% of any of our profit will go back into the farm partnership to help improve the farm and keep it for generations.
Yeah.
Um, and so Yeah, yesterday we got the seedlings in the ground. It was hard work, and we have a lot of hard work in front of us and a lot of things to figure out. It's a pretty new business model, so there's a lot of unknowns, which is exciting. But yeah, we got the seedlings in the ground, and I think one of the things I'm most excited about, and I can tell from my own journey, is that I've been the last few months, I've been like, we should be way more stressed out about this. Like it's a pretty substantial investment that we're making in the business.
Yeah.
We have friends and family money invested in the business. I'm like, we should be so stressed. Why aren't we stressed? And I realized that because of a lot of the growth that both my wife and I have taken on in our lives, the way that we created it and the support team that we put around us, we're supported. And so having this experience of being supported and resourced is such a new and stress-free experience that we're really grateful. We're really excited. My wife is so excited. She's going to hand water the plants today.
Oh.
So yeah, we hope to harvest in late September, early October this year. And yeah.
Oh, I'm happy for you. You deserve this, and I know that it will all work out. And I'm so glad that you've got the support from your family and friends. There's nothing better than that when you actually have support, from people who love you and care about you. And just to know that you've got, people have your back, people are with what you're doing. So that is amazing. And please do keep posting those amazing pictures, because I'm literally hooked. I want to see your journey.
Absolutely.
My last question for you is, Rodney, when are you going to write a book?
It's funny. So soon, I think soon. It's funny because literally 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had a woman reach out from the UK who had found the podcast and just really, it was really impactful for her, which was really humbling for me and really inspiring. And so I she reached out and I connected with her, and we just talked, and it really re-inspired me. And that was the first question. She's like, "When are you writing a book?" So it's in the works. I'm working on this rebrand, and I do want to write a book because I think it's a way to, for people to access the work around the Absent Father podcast. And so I'm excited. I do have an outline, which is, and there's plenty of content, but I really want to talk about how this influences. I think most people are influenced because of the way that our societies have played out and what we have sort of and this is not to bash men, it's just that the way we have evolved, it has allowed men to stay and maybe reinforced emotional disconnection and a lack of presence, which has had an impact on all of us, all of the sons and daughters. And so I want to set that scene and then talk about the impacts, and then ultimately really give us the opportunity to claim our superpowers. I think that's the real opportunity in all of that, is that we get to the other side and see who we really are and see our really tremendous gifts that come from that experience. So
That's so true. Oh, brilliant. Well, I will definitely be first in line, or first waiting over on Amazon to press that download button when you do write that book. And I hope that you write more than just about absent fathers. I mean, coaching books and just even about your journey, because you are such an interesting person. And like I said at the very start of this podcast, you are very inspirational. And I'm so glad that I reached out to you when I heard your podcast. And I'm not surprised that you've got more people reaching out to you as well, because you really are you're somebody that is most definitely very, very interesting, and you've got an amazing story to tell. And even just looking at the things that, you're doing on social media and stuff, nobody would even think that you've been through what you have been through. But I must say that you are brilliant. And I want to thank you so much for your time today, for coming on Kandy's Quarantine Conversations. And could you tell people how they can find you on social media, please?
For sure. But first I want to say, Kandy, I want to thank you for your reflection to me and your, I imagine part of your superpower is getting to see other people's greatness. And it means a lot to me for you to reflect back. And I know that that's part of your gift, and that you're probably impacting more people than you know, to reflect back what you see in my own greatness, because it moves me forward. I feel a responsibility to honor what you see. So I really, really want to thank you for that. And thank you for creating something beautiful out of this crazy quarantine space, and for your leadership, particularly in the conversation about anti-racism and what's going on in terms of the white supremacy culture that we have created in the United States, and really across the world. So I'm really grateful for you and your reflection and leadership.
Oh, no, thank you. That means so much to me. I'm grateful for you too. And I want to thank you as well, because you've always been, I reach out to you, you respond, you're very helpful. And I know that you genuinely care about people and you genuinely want to help people. And no matter it doesn't matter where they come from. I saw that you posted a video of your neighbor singing the other day, and I was just like, oh, this is brilliant, So I think that you are a brilliant person too. And I think that we actually have quite a few things in common. So, I want to thank you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want to stay in touch, they, of course, the Absent Father podcast, you can Google Absent Father podcast, and it's available on Google Play, as well as iTunes, and I think many other arenas. If you want to learn more about my work, you can go to rodneymueller.com. I pronounce it Miller, but Rodney Mueller, Mueller. And I think I'm on Instagram at Rodney A. Mueller, Mueller.com. Rodney A. Mueller is my Instagram. So I'm new to Instagram a bit.
Okay.
But those are the ways that you can get a hold of me. And most of that's on my website as well. So.
Brilliant. If anybody, particularly the males, need a life coach, don't feel embarrassed, don't feel ashamed about anything you've been through, I highly recommend Rodney Mueller to you. Believe me, if you feel like you're stuck in a hurdle and you can't move on because you're just angry at the things that have happened to you and you're finding it difficult to overcome them, this is definitely the man to go to. So yeah, don't delay, contact Rodney today. But thank you so much, Rodney.
Awesome. Thanks, Kandy.